Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to Presence. I am Doug King, and today I'm going to do a podcast about a podcast. Actually, I'm going to do a podcast about two podcasts, and I wanted to do that so that I could give a little bit of background about our direction right now, the tremendous amount of activity, and there is a lot of activity going on right now. This global conversation has picked up tremendous amount of momentum, and especially for Presence and our involvement with a number of different groups, and it's really exciting right now. And what I wanted to talk about first of all was the podcast I did with the folks at Nomad out of the UK. Was interviewed by Tim Nash. That was up last week. I've already gotten great response on that. I appreciate that feedback from everyone. Great connection. I mean, Nomad says they've got 20,000 plus subscribers. So that means that the ideas we're proposing are getting out there for people to consider. That's fantastic. It's what we're trying to do. And if you haven't listened to it, there is a discussion by Tim along with his co-host for this, who is Nick Thorley, and they're part of an overall staff. They've got some others on staff as well. And they have some great discussion at the end of my podcast, and they put their finger on some really pertinent questions and indicate, as I would agree, that we need to have some follow-up to this. And that is something that I'm sure will happen as we move forward. So check that out. I've listened to some of the other podcasts on Nomad. They're really well done. And it's going to give you a feel for where the new thinking of postmodernity is beginning to now be not just green, but also to move into integral yellow in terms of some of the perspectives. Now, remember, when we're looking at centers of gravity, no person is just a single postmodern, traditional, whatever. We are a combination of those things in our own lives, in different areas of our lives. Some of our thinking is more advanced in certain areas than in others. So what we're looking for in an individual is the center of gravity. And that means that in some cases you can have people that are green in some ways, still thinking in what we would consider to be first tier values, and then some are in yellow, thinking then for the first time about an integral approach to green and all of the first tier stages and levels. So great conversation with them, and an indication again that the Presence connections are really starting to blossom and bloom. The second one that I've got the link today for a video cast interview that I did for World Unity Week. And World Unity Week is hosted by Ben Bowler out of the UK. Ben's an interesting story, and he will mention in this interview that he and I connected some years ago when I was speaking at a conference with Don Beck and Rob Bell and some others. And when we were all out to eat one day, a lady named Pam Chaddock was wearing a t-shirt that said onegod.com. And Danae was asking her, what is that? And she said, oh, that's a site you can go to that's headed up by Ben Bowler in Australia. And in fact, Doug really should get in contact with Ben. I think they have a lot in common. I pursued that. And in a phone call with Ben, he happened to bring up, or we somehow got on the subject of Kurt Johnson, who had, of course, published The Coming Interspiritual Age. And Ben was very much interested in that work. And I said, well, I know Kurt really well. Since you're coming to the US, which he was, I said, why don't we see if we can set something up here in Atlanta? And in fact, we did. Ben came to Atlanta. Kurt Johnson came down from New York. We spent a weekend or something. I can't remember, 2 or 3 days. Great meetings, great discussions. And from there, things really began to travel forward on many different fronts. Kurt moving into the evolutionary leaders movement, and then, of course, Presence being invited to be a participant in the evolutionary leaders movement, and then Ben Bowler, who went from onegod.com to many international programs, interviewing international leaders from around the globe. He does this constantly. And Ben is in pursuit of the unity theme that is coming through the term convergence. And convergence is basically saying, hey, look at what's happening with science and spirituality. Look what's happening with psychology and philosophy. All of these different fields now are converging with similar universal themes, elements, and that is what is exciting about the work that we're doing, is that Presence is very much involved not just in closed conversations, meaning we are not just speaking with people who specifically come from the biblical narrative, nor are we talking with people that are just Christian or moving into post-Christian, but rather we're talking with people from all fields. And this absolutely fits what we have proposed as the meaning of Paul's work and his statement that God is all in all, which we speak of just about every time we do some type of conversation with anyone. So World Unity Week is that which is part of a movement called the 99 Days of Peace. And this will lead up to an international celebration by the United Nations this fall. And so Ben, for an entire week, actually it was 8 days. I guess the Beatles would say 8 days a week. There were a number of different speakers. There were people from indigenous, people from the arts, people from business, people from social media, science. There was participation by different folks from the evolutionary leaders group, of which Presence, as I said, is now a part. And it was really fantastic to do that. So this week, the link that I've got in our newsletter is for an interview that Ben did with me and Patrick Carolan. Now, Patrick is a Catholic activist. So immediately, you may have some in Christianity who ask the question, well, if you're post-Christian, why are you doing a podcast with a Catholic activist? And again, we would go to spiral dynamics, which says that when you take an integral approach to any conversation, you're attempting to contribute to all the worldviews in the spiral. In other words, you're trying to have a conversation with any and everyone based on the page number represented by the other person. Otherwise, how in the world can you do a global conversation? What'll happen is that you'll end up in a closed system. For example, I've heard people say, yeah, people of a particular denomination go to Christian bookstores and buy books that simply reinforce their denominational viewpoints. That's what I would refer to as a closed system. Or I've heard people say, why would you want to talk to people in this field or that field? Isn't the Bible enough? Well, when we talk about convergence, the power of it is whether or not the universal principles of science, let's just take science, because I'm going to talk about it next week. I have a major announcement that I'm going to get into next week because it's just too much to do. I mean, we've got this World Unity Week video cast here. We've had Nomad, so I'm kind of parsing these things out. But in science, there are a number of principles we'll talk about that are either going to show that what you're saying in your narrative aligns with the nature of nature or it doesn't. And that provides validation. Either your narrative is validated by other narratives or it's not. Narratives that we know through science, for example, you'd never argue with physics. You'd never say, oh, I don't know if I believe in physics. So this is very critical. You see, if you stay in a closed system and all you do is argue with other people who are coming from the biblical narrative as well, you would end up with a religion with thousands of denominations, which is, of course, exactly what we have when we look at the world religion known as Christianity. At the same time, when we get to the postmodern Christians, they are the ones that are really moving and stepping into the first part of second tier, which is yellow. And so there are a lot of green yellow people that are now appearing and having conversations about principles from each. Patrick is an example of someone who readily accepts, adopts conversations with any and everyone. He has no fear in that. He says, I still consider myself a Christian. However, Patrick and I hit it off really well. He'd like to do some more things. We'll see what the future unfolds with that. But Patrick is a person who is feet on the street. I mean, this gentleman's whole life, and he's, I don't know if he's my age or not. I'll say he's younger, but who isn't? The point is, he's got a number of years under his belt as an activist, and he has been an activist for many different groups. And so he's not just someone who writes about it. Yeah, we need people that write about it. He's not someone that just goes on social media. Yeah, we need social media. We're using it. We podcast. But Patrick has actually been the infamous feet on the street and a really great heart, just a tremendous heart. So as you listen to this World Unity Week video interview from Ben, you'll hear some things that you agree with. You'll hear some things you won't agree with. But again, that's the purpose of a global conversation. And it's the purpose of letting your light shine, meaning Jesus said, don't put a form over your light. Forms separate. So I hope you'll enjoy this interview. And it will be, I think, exciting to see that, for example, the theme of World Unity Week was a new earth rising. Now, how cool is that? A new earth rising. That's our tagline, a global conversation for a new earth. And now for an entire week, you have people from all different walks of life and different movements who are talking about the theme, Rising New Earth. In the interview, actually, as I think about it, Ben actually cited from the biblical narrative the work of Peter, who talks about the new earth, and the work of John in his Revelation and the new earth. And Patrick weighs in on that as well. Now, does Presence have a lot to say about all the things written by Peter and all the things written by John in his Revelation? Yes. We have done series, hours of podcasting about the new earth as it is unfolded in the biblical narrative. So, what do you do when you're in a conversation like that? Everybody expresses their ideas of what the new earth is. I do my best within a given time frame to connect where I can with the idea that the new earth is a present concept, not something that comes later, that is not here now. But I can't get into the degree of depth that we have gotten into in an integral approach to theology, where we really get into the complexity and the fullness of these themes and subjects. But I'm just saying, isn't it really cool that they took this theme? And Ben, of course, who came up with this theme, is well aware of presence and a lot of the things that we stand for. And in fact, I mentioned earlier how we're always bringing up the quote from Paul that God is all in all. Ben brought it up and asked me to talk about the context of that in 1 Corinthians 15 is where it's found when Paul was writing, and I did that. And I did it in light of unity and the defeat of separation, which is the defeat of death, which is required for unity. So now we've got people from all over the globe, literally, that are talking with us about our perspective. And let me reiterate, in some of these settings, venues, podcasts, video casts, I can go into some depth, but not completely when you're talking with people that don't come from the narrative, for example. There are a lot of people in the Evolutionary Leaders Group that have this same perspective of the principles of unity, but they don't come from the biblical narrative. So the question is, how do you talk to them if you come from the biblical narrative in a way that reinforces your agreement with unity, peace, oneness, harmony, etc.? A lot more will be said on that, a lot more, because people have a real tendency to attach to particular forms, even to the biblical narrative itself. People become very alarmed if they are attached to the biblical narrative and not to God. We have to remember the biblical narrative is that which is pointing to God. It's not about the narrative, it's about the God to which the narrative points. So we have to talk about everybody's narrative, compare those narratives, and see how we feel like things align or do not align. And if they don't align, then we talk about where we feel like they don't align. But synergy groups are, that's what the evolutionary leaders are founded on, synergy circles. This is unprecedented. I've done this all my life. I've never had so much interaction as I'm having now. And next week, when I make a major announcement, you'll see even more that the doors have opened wide for presence to step in and fully engage in conversation and dialogue with others. You cannot ask for a better situation than that. So that's all I really wanted to say. This isn't a podcast about a particular subject. It's a podcast about the podcast with Nomad and about the one with Patrick and Ben, and where I see presence contributing and the excitement I feel that is happening on this planet among thousands of people and many, many movements. Again, I will emphasize, from many different fields, who are all seeking these universal principles, the ones that are found in the biblical narrative itself. Hey, if you got any comments about this, any questions about this, shoot me an email. Send it on over to doug@presence.tv. I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Sometimes that takes a little while, depending upon projects and the number of other things I'm trying to do to answer other questions, etc. But thank you for joining us in this conversation. And again, stay tuned for the major announcement next week that really is indicating that these kinds of conversations, podcasts and video casts, this is just the start. And it's going to get even better and better. So that's all I have to say. Hey, go check out the link, check out the interview, watch it from the perspective of how this conversation is expanding and the excitement that's around it. Other than that, have a great week out there, and I'll be back with our other announcement promptly toward the end of next week. Have a great rest of this week. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.